So tonight we're going to talk about what it takes to run a club off-field. And I think we've done 4 direct workshops in the last 2 to 3 weeks with clubs currently in the competition. And by the way, clubs are supposed to be, when you're running them, it's supposed to be fun. But it's very good at sucking the life out of volunteers, isn't it? And good intentioned people come into these roles, they're trying to balance family, club and work at the same time. It's hard. Very rarely do I see anyone get 3 right at the one time. And there's not one sport in Australia that is educating our volunteers on how to run a club. You might be the sponsorship person, the grants person, the membership person, the vice president, treasurer, president. Last person standing sometimes. Go your hardest. Good luck. On your way. That's pretty much a lot of the clubs. We're going to talk about the pressure that community clubs are under. We're going to talk about, look, it's interesting, a lot of the clubs I deal with, if I had to summarise it in short points, most clubs are run by 3 to 4 people. They're doing 90% of the work. Most clubs I deal with do not have a budget. They're literally flying by the seat of their pants. You're turning over X, and I use a rule of thumb, whatever your salary cap is, and a lot of my clubs can't afford to pay the cap, by the way, but whatever you pay your players, multiply that by 3, that's what you need to turn over just to pay the bills. So if you're talking about Div 1, if you're spending the cap, I think the Div 1 cap this year, they're going from 16 to 18 games, 135, they'll have to turn over about 400 grand. Some of the clubs are turning over nowhere near that. So if you think the second division is about 100, is that right? I know, and I'll talk about my little club, if you don't mind, for a minute. Coralines, anyone, hopefully the old former leagues have got rock. Hands up, does anyone know where it is? It's pretty good, yeah, it's pretty good. Look, it's in the middle of nowhere. Our club nearly fell over in 2005. It's now probably one of the high-performing clubs in country Victoria in terms of what we've been able to achieve on-field, what we've been able to achieve off-field. And there's a formula to running a club. It goes back to what I said earlier. There's no one teaching our volunteers on how to run a club. It's interesting, when we talk about the challenges, there's more clubs in debt than not. We're going to talk about structure. We're going to talk about volunteers. Potentially a lot of my clubs are not aware there's a federal government initiative out there to pay for volunteers to work for your club. 99% of my clubs do not know that exists. That can change their world. It can extend the lifespan of those 3 to 4 people doing 90% of the work. So we're going to go through a series of slides tonight. I'll just, before I move on to the slides, but for a lot of my clubs, it just can be a burden. That person trying to hold up that boulder, a lot of my volunteers feel that way because a lot of them feel the pressure if they leave. And a lot of my clubs are fragile. It doesn't matter what level of sport that I'm at. And we're doing this with over 750 clubs. Most clubs are 1 or 2 people away from things turning a little bit sour. You hear me say you're 1 president, 1 senior coach away from a good club becoming a not so good club. Things can change really quickly. And as we know in sport, it's all about momentum. When it's going this way, when I say downwards, it can be like a runaway train. It's all right when it's going this way. Everyone comes along for the ride. But when it's going the other way, it can be like a runaway train. So I'm going to touch on this as a key slide first. This is how my clubs raise money, and this is why there's more clubs in debt than not. They have a bit of gate, and if there's any junior clubs, just exclude the gate. Like the canteen, like the bar, like 10 to 20 sponsors, and most clubs have 10 to 20 sponsors rusted on, win, lose, draw, rain, hail, shine, that they'll contribute regardless. It's virtually seen as a donation. Most of the clubs might sell 2 to 3 branding assets if you're lucky. Some clubs don't bother. Most clubs have some fence signs. I'm steering clubs away from fence signs unless you're on a prominent bypass. Most clubs have 3 to 6 fundraisers a year. Most clubs have got your general registrations. That might be your netballers, your footballers, your women's team, your masters team, your veterans. And most clubs have 10 to 30 financial members that sit outside their players and their life members. Hands up if you believe that represents your club. Hands up. That's my Nostradamus slide, because that's how 95% of my clubs are raising money. And that's why there's more clubs in debt than not. We're going to go through, I think it's worth showing this slide, just because a lot of clubs think it's just them. They're under pressure. I would like to think I've met with, spoken to, travelled around this country more than anyone, I'd like to think, at community level in terms of what the challenges are. I did 30, in the start of last season, I did 30 clubs in 45 days. 25 were in debt of the 30, with an average debt of $53,000. And the thing about it, the clubs don't say much. They keep their head down. They often don't tell the league. They're concerned if it gets out, the coaches will hear about it, the players hear about it, then they bolt. They'll take off. But it's important to emphasise, this is, my first slide was, this is a 100-year-old community problem where people are coming in, doing their best intentions, balancing family, club and work at the same time. Very rarely do I see anyone get 3 right at the one time. There's usually something that gives. And the problem we've got is that the turnover of committee is on average 2.5 to 3 years. So by the time you get them up to speed, they think, God, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. It's supposed to be fun. And they end up moving on because they've got other things in their life. And it's all about that formula we're going to touch on. I want to show you a league I work with. I think it's really important. I've taken the league off, and I'm going to show this to Danny and Aaron. But we did 10 clubs 2.5, 3 years ago with a league. They went so well in the first year, they increased it to 19. And these are the increase in the numbers. And these can be validated by the league. Most important thing, the league were owed $230,000 by the clubs. At the end of our 2-year program, that debt had dropped to $44,000 because the volunteers, the administrators were being educated on how to run the club, how to raise funds, not using that old-fashioned model that I just showed you 2 minutes ago. Good intention people, but it's about, we're going to change your philosophy of how to run your club, particularly from a revenue point of view, particularly from a structure point of view. My background is nearly 20 years of an executive, sitting on 3 boards as administrator of 3 AFL clubs. In essence, what we are doing in this model, which is now 4 years in the making, we're simplifying an AFL type model for community and teaching our volunteers how to go about it. Those are pretty, we look at here, that was the lowest league debt in 25 years. So within 2 years, the league was owed $230,000, it dropped to $44,000. Again, educating our volunteers on what's required. They're the real challenges, pretty consistent. And this applies to, we're in 12 sports, by the way. We're doing soccer, we're doing netball, we're doing cricket, we're doing golf, we're doing sailing. The fundamentals of running a club are exactly the same. Every committee in the world needs a committee structure. You need governance, you need finance, you need membership, you need volunteers, you need sponsorship, you need fundraising. But again, there's not one sport in Australia that's educating our volunteers on how to run a club. We're going to change that now. We're going to talk briefly about sponsorship. A lot of my clubs, they sell sponsorship. They don't know what they're selling. Remember I mentioned earlier, most clubs had 15 to 20 locked-in sponsors, rusted-on sponsors, rain, hail, shine. They don't know what they're selling. We've developed a new portal, a new program, and we tell them to sell 3 key components. We talk about branding, we talk about commercialising your scoreboard, and we talk about having a centralised platform that every club and every corporate, every person involved with that club can tap into, which I'll touch on in the later part of the session. But often with my club, sponsorship, it's often a donation. When I do a lot of these sessions, And I often, how much fresh air is in the sponsorship? It's often pulling on favours, on relationships more than anything else. So we're going to talk about how we get out of that cycle. I'm not going to promote this widely tonight, but I got to a stage at the end of last year, about December. I thought, we've done 500 clubs, we're now at 750. I said, this is a mess. There's not one organisation in Australia educating our volunteers how to run a club. So I end up putting pen to paper. The bloke on the camera behind me last week, he was my editor. And it's $5. I'm happy to give it away, but people say if you give it away, no one values it. So we put $5 on the website. So it's on our website. If you feel compelled to see the challenges, and it's really, we're all ordinary people. I'm the VP of my local community club at Coral Inn, batting well above our weight. From a junior point of view, our seniors have been in 80 of the last grand finals. Our juniors didn't have a club 10 years ago. We've now got a junior club. Our facilities have gone from here to here. Again, we're going to talk about the formula to running a club. I'm going to touch on, this is the formula I'm talking about. We're going to touch on structure. At the end of the day, that's the key, isn't it? Again, I'll refer back to my local club. My local president is going into his 20th year. Great delegator. Points the right people. They don't work all the time. It's about sharing the responsibilities amongst many rather than those 3 or 4 doing a lot of the work. A lot of my clubs don't have a budget. We show them a simple, basic templates, particularly forecasting, particularly a couple of slides that every single president in this room should ideally receive on a monthly basis during the season. Most of my clubs can smell they're in trouble about June. They can smell it. They typically get some money in the front half of the season with some membership and sponsorship. The weather starts to turn a bit crappy about June. Gates start to drop off. Canteen starts to drop off. Bar starts to drop off. The committee start to think we need to run 2 or 3 fundraisers just to get our head above water. Happens all the time. I'm steering clubs away from fundraising, by the way. You want to invest in your core business. I unashamedly, being the VP of Coral Inn, want to invest in our core business. And often what I find with a lot of my clubs, particularly the football side of things, 80% of my clubs can't afford to pay the cap. Often the cap, what's being spent, if you spend it right, is usually reflective of the latter, if you spend it right. But a lot of my clubs don't have the business model to pay the bills. I'm going to touch on facilities, the importance of that. I'm going to touch on culture. That's in essence, on one page, how to run a club. It's not that easy though, is it? It's not that easy, but that is in essence what we educate our clubs in terms of putting in place. We do workshops for clubs. We do an audit. So every club yesterday would have received an email from me where we require a minimum of 5 up to 10 people to complete a short 10-minute survey. So that's just that simple. A lot of my clubs, it's like a big forest. They don't know where to start. They spend half an hour at committee meetings deciding the colour of a scarf. Just completely inefficient use of time. We're going to go through volunteer support. When I might touch on volunteer support. So there's a federal government initiative out there. I tackle volunteers with 4 angles. You need someone at your club to coordinate your volunteers. Some of my clubs struggle for volunteers because sometimes the person doing the asking is not necessarily the right person to do the asking. We're going to talk about structure. I've got a sample structure for a small club and a medium-sized club of how to structure up your organisation. And I break it up into 3 levels. One being the executive, the decision makers, they run the club. The green levels, which are those who fill roles that sit on a committee. I'm a big believer if you're on the committee, you've got a role to play. If you're on the committee and you don't have a role to play, maybe you shouldn't be there. A lot of my people, I have a number of people at committees that are just there to hear the goss. They're just there to hear the goss. And then we've got a 3rd level where people can potentially contribute to your committee who don't necessarily need to be on the committee or don't necessarily want to be on a committee. I'm VP of Coral Inn. I didn't go to one training run last year. I'm also assistant coach of my daughter's footy team in the city. I live in the city. I try to get there to 3 out of 4 football games, but I'm not there during the week. So I can still contribute in a significant manner. I find a lot of my clubs, I expect you to be there Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I'm losing a lot of good quality people with the inflexibility of running the clubs. We're going to talk about strategic plans. So those that do the workshops, we do a 2.5 to 3 hour session where we focus on that. We do an audit of your club, which every club will be doing. We focus on structure. We focus on volunteers, potentially having people over 55 fully paid for by the federal government to work for your club. And the great thing about this initiative, there's no cap to the numbers. You can have as many as you like. It's for people that are 55 and over and pre-pension. It's a very generous assets test. 95% plus of the population that I'm dealing with qualify for this. I won't go into the detail now because that'll take up, I'll be here for 2.5 hours, not 30 minutes. We give every club a strategic plan. We don't believe in giving clubs 30-page strategic plans. We give them 5 to 6 page, high-level, 12-month operational plans and 3 to 5 year plans. The great thing about our strategic plan is that it helps clubs, particularly with funding, whether it's local government, whether it's state government, whether it's federal government. A lot of my clubs are going to councils, and they're your key partner, with often the problem, not with part of the solution, what their journey is, what their vision is. So I think the strength of what the league's doing here is that everyone ideally, and once you do your audit, I'm going to narrow your focuses down to 3 times 5 priorities. Your immediate priorities, timely and future. And that's where your focus goes. And we're going to focus on particularly those 3 or 4 revenue initiatives. We're going to touch on, anyone who's got Facebook, like my page. I post a heap of stuff on there. Particularly when we go around, you'll see where we've gone in netball, soccer, AFL, Queensland, Tassie, Victoria. You'll see there's a heap of content on Facebook. And anytime we get some new content, I think we posted up a new video yesterday on the ideal committee structure. 2 days earlier, we posted up a 5-minute video on revenue generation. It's interesting, when we did this, we launched this probably 4 years ago. What it looks like compared to 12 months ago to now is poles apart. We've just gained so much information, so much knowledge over that journey. And as I said, I think we would be as informed as any group in Australia about what it takes and the challenges and the opportunities to run a community club. We're going to touch on, this is the model. This is probably the most important model, which has really taken 3 years to actually pull together. I always talk about there's 14 pieces to running a club. Most clubs are doing the red. They'll have some general registrations, they'll have a gate if you're a senior club, you'll have a canteen, and you'll have a bar. Clubs are struggling. Remember, up here, 30% of turnover. Ideally, sponsorship should be approximately 30% of whatever your turnover needs to be. So if you've got a 100 grand cap, you're turning over 300, should be around 90 grand in sponsorship. I know in my local club we turned over about 90 this year, but our sponsorship was 90, but we turned over about 350. We didn't quite hit our levels. But a lot of we're selling, and that all came down to structure, but we're batting well above our average in terms of what we generate. A lot of my clubs are struggling with branding assets. A lot of clubs don't have a centralised platform to promote all their partners. A lot of clubs have got a scoreboard, but they don't know how to sell it. They don't know how to commercialise it. Sometimes they've got existing sponsorships and it's like, do you want fries with that? I'll just throw them up there. I know from my local club we make 40 grand out of our 90 purely out of the electronic scoreboard. We don't have fence signs anymore. People don't look at fence signs, by the way, unless it's your sign. The odd person do. But unless you're on a major drive sort of thoroughfare along the Princes Highway, e.g. Pakenham, I'm steering clubs away from fence signage because it's timely, it's costly, hence the importance of having the digital opportunity. A lot of my clubs, Australian Sports Foundation. Every single club in Australia should be registered with the Australian Sports Foundation. Hands up who are registered. Who are? Yeah. There's probably 3 or 4 hands. At the end of the day, even those that are registered really don't know how to commercialise it properly. And that's been the world of change. It's far more advantageous for potentially some sponsorship or a coterie type contribution to go through your ASF than potentially coming directly to the club. Potentially a 17% tax windfall. I'm not going to go into that tonight. Every single club in Australia should be registered with the Australian Sports Foundation. Fixture, a lot of clubs that they take their fixture. For me, it's one of the greatest economic drivers you can put in place. Putting on my Coralline hat, we made 2 fixture changes last year. I think it made us another 25 grand. A lot of hot dogs, a lot of sausage rolls, a lot of party pies. Being creative with the fixture. We talk about coterie. Look, I know there's a couple of clubs in Premier League that are generating close to a 6-figure sum on this level. And it really depends on, it's not for everyone, but for some of the bigger clubs that have got long-standing history with good networks, there's potentially an opportunity there. What we do with clubs is this. Just ask yourselves in this room, how many initiatives is your club doing well? When I say doing well, unless you're netting 65% from your canteen, unless you're netting 65% from your bar, that's not a tick. That's exactly what it should be, at a bare minimum. But often clubs, they'll pay the boundary umpire $10 and they'll pay the water boy $20 and there's no accounting for it. It's literally no tracking of the business model. I know with our organisation at Coralline, we turn over canteen and bar, we track them. We often find when you track them, the behaviours can change. Again, it comes down to the reporting that we provide. A lot of my clubs are normally doing 4 or 5 well. Some of them are doing 2 or 3. I've done 4 Outer East clubs in the last 2 to 3 weeks. They range between 2 and 4. My role at these workshop sessions is not to take them to 14. My role is to take them from, let's say the red up there are okay. My role is to take that club from 4 to 8. Not to 14. Next year I might add one or 2 more. A lot of my clubs don't need 14. That is in essence, and trust me, this works. What we're finding with our clubs, 80% of our clubs are moving forward. Big time. I'm going to show you some results. 20% don't. And the reason why they don't, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink it. That is the model moving forward for clubs. And it's obviously there's a lot more detail when we do our workshops. So those that do the survey, those that would have received it yesterday, just explain the survey. It's a 10-minute survey. There's 10 logins. As long as you get 4 or 5 people to do it. If you have worked with me longer than 12 months ago, I encourage you to do this survey again. Because the world can change in 12 months. I've seen clubs go from here to here in a hurry and can go from here to here in a hurry. Hence, an ongoing audit of the well-being and health of your club. The primary user is the first of the 10 logins. What that means, we get to access a little bit of additional information, some financial data, and also some challenges. I ask you to rank about 12 to 15 challenges, what you believe are your top 5 challenges at your club at this current time. We use that potentially to help the league in structuring their club development program of how to take their club forward. I've allowed 6 weeks, hopefully, to complete the survey. Obviously, earlier the better, but that's hopefully enough time, appreciating there's a Christmas, New Year break in the middle. What I've learned, I suppose, in my former life is that we can all learn from each other. When I was in AFL, we all shared everything. We didn't share contracts about what Emirates were paying and all that sort of stuff at Collingwood, but we shared data on levels of sponsorship, levels of fundraising, levels of membership. And often a lot of clubs think they're going okay, but when they see the benchmarking, they realise that maybe they're not going that great. Or it could work the other way. So I encourage everyone to participate. I'm not going to be disclosing individual information to the league. We'll be collating the data so you can learn from the data. You can learn from each other. One perfect example, one club I was using is they were generating 30 grand in sponsorship and they thought they were doing terrifically, but compared to their competitors who were generating anywhere between 70 to 120, they thought they were in the ballpark, but they were completely out of the ballpark. By allowing the benchmarking, which is what the league are going to be doing for you, this will help you enormously. Face-to-face workshop, we normally charge 2.5 grand for that. and we have a 3-hour face-to-face. We choose 4 initiatives and from 50 to 100 grand. I don't say that lightly. It's adopting 3 or 4 of those 14 initiatives to take you from wherever you sit to this. The league are supporting that, so we've got a revised price. So if any other clubs wanted to do a 3-hour workshop for 2 grand, I'd like to think that we pay ourselves high double digits over in terms of what you invest, in terms of the outcome of what you get. This is what we do. We have the workshop, we give you a strategic plan, we give you a new revenue model. We've spent a year filming. There's 170 2-minute videos on how to run your club. There's 100 downloadable templates. You don't need to reinvent the wheel with P&Ls, forecasts, sponsorship proposals, position descriptions. They're all there. The great thing of being out in so many clubs, you get to see the good, the bad, and the not so good. I'm finding my clubs who are struggling to recruit volunteers, use the education to recruit your volunteers. Because often what happens, they're thrown into the role of secretary or they're thrown into the role of treasurer. Good luck, go your hardest. Where do I start? Steer them to our education. Steer them to our 10 2-minute videos on how to run your finances. We provide the templates. If you're trying to recruit someone to do grants, steer them to our education on our grants. So they're not just thrown in a big black hole. What I find with a lot of clubs, they often see how hard 4 or 5 people are working and they sort of stand back because they think if they get too forward, they end up falling in a big dark hole and they can't get out of it. Use the education to help recruit people to your club. It's a 12-month subscription. So basically you get access to all the videos, all the templates. You get to ring TDS anytime during the year. Often the clubs want to have a conversation directly with us they can't necessarily have with the league. So we can help you in that regard. That's what we educate you on. Governance, committee structures. If I had to summarise the importance of structure, clubs still have the same old structure, completely out of date. They don't, secretary and 1 treasurer, and they've got no one overseeing revenue. They've got 4 or 5 doing everything. The president or the trying to do sponsorship and trying to run 4 or 5 fundraisers at the same time. Structure is the most important aspect of what it takes to run a club. If you go back to that original formula I put up there, the first one was about people. Clubs are all about people. My local football club president going to his 20th year is no fluke. Shared the responsibility. Anyone who watches my videos, go onto my website. We're updating our website in the next couple of weeks as well. But we finish off with one theme. Successful community clubs share the load. As I said earlier, most clubs are fragile. They lose 1 or 2 key people. They can go from here to here and like that. So it's about evening the responsibilities, getting the structure right, running it like a business. The general stats I have of the clubs I deal with, 65% do not have a budget. 90% of my clubs do not forecast. I'm a bean counter. One day after a budget is launched, it's out of date. You've got to track it. My local club in the middle of nowhere turns over 350 grand, been a highly successful club, has got a model that turns over 350 grand with no town, no population, not one shop. We used to have a phone box, they took that away. We used to have a milk bar, no milk bar anymore. There's nothing at Coralline. There's 5 roads to get there, 3 of them are dirt. So when clubs come to me and say, I don't think we can do that, and I said, we're competing against all the same sponsors in the same area. I said, I'd love to have a town to compete against. I find clubs aren't doing sponsorship that well, that there's plenty of opportunities for clubs. So that's what we educate in. We educate that on smartphones, tablets, Mac and IBM. So it doesn't matter where you are, providing you have an internet connection, you can tap into our education. Use these videos to attract people. I talked about the Australian Sports Foundation. There's 3 videos in our library from the CEO of the Australian Sports Foundation, Patrick Walker, who speaks about how every single club in Australia should be benefiting from the ASF. People learn at different speeds. The videos we provide, you might watch it once and get it. Some people might watch it 5 times and get it. Some people might watch it 10 times and get it. But they can learn in their own time, in their own house. Might be on holidays in Bali, watching 10 videos on how to improve your finances. Probably not a great holiday. It's just a great example of using technology. 3 or 4 years ago, this wasn't possible because the cost of data was just way too expensive. Now, technology and community is finally meeting. Use technology and community is finally meeting. We've allocated 6 dates. We're locking down from 3 weeks. We need a break. We've been going everywhere. So any clubs who are interested, just send us an email. I did this in Tassie. We've had, on average, 50% strike rates from clubs because they feel so compelled that we can't continue to go down the road that we've been going down in the past. Our world needs to change. And as I said earlier, there's no one teaching our volunteers on how to run a club. That's what we do. Our role out of these workshops is to give you 2 takeouts. We identify 4 to 5 operational issues to focus on. It might be to focus on your budget or to get your structure right, or etc. But we then give you 4 or 5 revenue ideas to focus on, and that's it. We don't give you any more than that. If we give you more than that, sometimes it ends up being that person who's sitting under the boulder. It just becomes all-consuming. It becomes a burden. We keep it that simple. Our role is to bring the big forest and simple it down into 5 operational areas and 4 revenue focuses. It is that simple. There's some dates. Anyone's interested in locking a workshop, maybe speak to your committee, whether you think it's worthwhile. I've got Grant. So Grant did the Grant from Monbulk 12 months ago. Grant?
Yeah, the second one.
Yeah, so we've done 2. And Grant just said to me in the last, hopefully not divulging too much, but you had your best financial result you've had in the history of your club this year. Yep. Is that fair? Yep. So again, there's a formula to running a club. But 80% of the clubs will go forward. It's about having someone in your club to champion. Often, all due respect to presidents, that's not the president sometimes.
You just need the numbers too, Terry, when you turn up, make sure they know they're coming along to listen. They don't have to really do anything. And they'll probably leave ready to go.
With the workshops, I encourage everyone and anyone to attend the workshops. We did a session with King Lake, Clinton's down the back. They had 50 in the room. Outstanding. And he had 15 to 20 players. It's really important to get the players' engagement in this. Often the players think they're there just to have a kick. They don't really know what it takes to run a club. If you come to Coral Inn, this is what they have to sell memberships. They do a mid-year. Ball. We have our goods and services. They contribute to it. We auction off a birthday party for 2 groups to go run for the junior club. The players do makeovers for their pre-season camp. 15 blokes go that way, 15 blokes go that way. They do makeovers like painting and carpentry and all that sort of stuff. First 2 big games, we usually have 2 big night games after round 1 and round 4. They pick up the rubbish. A lot of my clubs, the players are running the club, which is a big challenge. It's about the committee taking charge of the club. Our players, we say to this, it takes a lot to run a club. We turn over 350 grand. We build a model that gives you every opportunity to hopefully play in the finals. Like our club's been in 14 senior consecutive finals, competing against towns of 3, 5 and 10,000. Phillip Island 7,000, Warragul's 10,000, Inverloch's 3,000. We have nothing. And we've been 5 of the last 6 grand finals. So it works for us and it works for a lot of other clubs. That's pretty much it. I don't know how I've gone for time, Danny. Is it half an hour? Have I gone over? Have you got any questions? Fire away. Everyone's done. Berkey, you were there the other night. Is it Berkey? What did you think of the session? it makes you actually look at your club and take stock of where you're at. I think that was one of the really good things that, just a questionnaire, just to let it go through where you sit with one, what is some areas we really miss. We haven't even checked them. A lot of the clubs get so busy just getting teams on the park, football, netball, and just trying to raise enough money to pay the bills. They can't step back and have a real high look at their club because they're just caught in the wash. They can't get out. But they don't know any different because no one's teaching them what to do. So that's what we do. Craig, what was your takeout from the session the other night?
Invaluable roadmap, really.
Some people have actually said to me, and obviously we've crashed in 30 minutes into a 3-hour session, right? Just right now. People often come at the end of the session and say, we nearly need to unlearn what we've learned in the last 20 to 30 years. That revenue model that I showed up front, where 95% of the clubs are raising money that way, that my mother and father, life members of Coralline, they used that 40 years ago. Nothing's changed. And that's why there's more clubs in debt than not. It's exactly why the AFL are starting to invest a lot more into this. And I think I'd like to applaud the board to go on the front foot, because I often find participation's one thing. Ideally it should be investment of club participation 50%, club wellbeing 50%, but in the past it's been like 90%, 10%. 90% into participation and 10% has gone into club wellbeing. But the clubs are drowning. The clubs are under massive pump. There's more clubs in debt than not. So let's do things a bit differently. Let's re-educate our administrators on how we run a club. And as I said, I had to summarise it in one statement. My benefit of working nearly 20 years at the biggest game in the country, being AFL, clubs turning over 50 to 60 million, it's no different to running a community club, just a few less zeros. And that's the model. And that's what we do. So thanks everyone for your time. Have I gone for time? But hopefully it's not too bad.